I am the captain of this aircraft. My authority is final. Captain Henderson's voice boomed down the jet bridge. I'm denying you boarding. He saw Dr. Annalise Dubois, a brilliant black cardiologist with a valid first-class ticket, and decided she was a security risk. He turned his back on her, enjoying the ripple of humiliation among the other passengers. What the captain didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that Dr. Dubois was the beloved wife of Marcus Thorne, the ruthless billionaire founder of Thorne Capital, and Marcus Thorne was a man who didn't file complaints when his wife was insulted. He launched hostile takeovers. As Annalise calmly pulled out her phone, she wasn't calling customer service. She was making the single most expensive phone call in the airline's history. Captain Henderson thought he was exercising his authority. In reality, he had just insulted the one woman whose husband had the power, the money, and the cold-blooded rage to buy the entire airline just to fire him personally. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when the scales of justice are balanced with the weight of a billion-dollar fortune. The air in Terminal 4 of JFK International was a familiar hum of controlled chaos. Dr. Annalise Dubois, however, felt an island of calm within it. The 3-day cardiology conference had been invigorating, a whirlwind of new research and old colleagues, but the pull of home was stronger. She smoothed down her tailored blazer, the fabric, a soft charcoal gray that complemented her warm, dark skin. A simple gold necklace, a gift from her husband, rested at her collarbone. She was tired, but a satisfied, productive kind of tired. And the prospect of sinking into the plush leather of seat 2A on Aerovista Flight 212 to San Francisco was a siren song of comfort. She'd flown Aerovista for years. They were reliable, if a bit stuffy. Their loyalty program was decent, and their first-class service was consistently good, a small but necessary luxury for a surgeon whose work demanded she be rested and sharp upon arrival. We are now pleased to invite our first-class passengers to begin boarding through Gate B24, a cheerful voice announced over the PA system. Annalise gathered her leather carry-on in her briefcase, which held the notes that could one day help save lives. She joined the short, orderly queue, a mix of seasoned business travelers and a few couples treating themselves. When she reached the front, she smiled warmly at the gate agent, a young woman named Sarah, whose name tag was slightly askew. "Good afternoon," Annalise said, holding out her phone with the boarding pass displayed. "Seat 2A, Sarah scanned the code. "Have a wonderful flight, Dr. Dubois." Annalise stepped forward onto the jet bridge, the scent of filtered cabin air and jet fuel filling her senses. She was halfway down the corridor when a figure blocked her path. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a silvering hair cut in a severe military style. The 4 stripes on his epaulettes identified him as the captain. And his arms were crossed, his posture an unyielding wall of authority. "Hold on a minute," he said, his voice a low grumble that cut through the ambient noise. His eyes, a pale washed-out blue, swept over her from her expensive but understated shoes to her professionally styled hair. It wasn't a glance, it was an assessment, and Annalise felt a sudden prickling chill. "Is there a problem, Captain?" she asked, her tone even and professional. "I'll be the judge of that," he replied, not moving. "Let me see your boarding pass." Slightly taken aback by his abrasive tone, she held out her phone again. He didn't take it. He squinted at the screen, his lip curling almost imperceptibly. "Dr. Annalise Dubois." He read aloud, drawing out the syllables of her name as if it were a foreign concept. "First class. How did you manage that?" The question hung in the air, thick and poisoned. It wasn't a security question. It wasn't a procedural check. It was an accusation. Annalise felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. All around them, the line had halted. The other first-class passengers were watching. "I managed it by purchasing a ticket. Captain," she said, her voice dropping a degree, losing its warmth and gaining a steely edge. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to board." He smirked, a truly unpleasant expression that crinkled the corners of his pale eyes. "We've had a lot of issues recently, upgrades that aren't quite legitimate, fraudulent documents. It's my responsibility to protect the integrity of our aircraft." He was speaking to her, but his voice was pitched for the audience behind them. He was making an example of her, humiliating her. The other passengers began to murmur their expressions, a mixture of embarrassment and impatience. A flight attendant, a younger woman with kind eyes named Chloe, appeared in the aircraft doorway. "Captain Henderson, is everything all right?" she asked tentatively. Captain Henderson ignored her. He looked directly at Annalise. "I'm going to need to see some identification to verify this ticket." Her jaw tightened. This was beyond protocol. It was a targeted harassment, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a scene. With deliberate, precise movements, she opened her briefcase, retrieved her wallet, and produced her driver's license and her hospital ID, which clearly stated her title, Dr. Annalise Dubois, head of cardiothoracic surgery. He took the cards from her, his fingers brushing against hers in a way that felt like a violation. He held them up next to the phone, comparing the photos. "Well, the names match," he conceded, as if granting a great favor, "but something about this doesn't feel right. It's highly unusual." "What exactly is unusual, Captain?" Annalise pressed her voice dangerously quiet. "That a black woman is a doctor, or that she's flying in a premium cabin that she paid for with her own money?" His face hardened into a mask of indignation. "Now you're making accusations. I'm just doing my job. You people are always so quick to play that card. You people." The words struck her like a physical blow. The quiet professionalism she had fought to maintain was cracking. Her hands trembled slightly, so she clenched them into fists at her sides. "Captain Judy, the gate agent." Sarah said, her voice quavering as she stepped onto the jet bridge. "Her ticket is valid. It's all confirmed in the system." "I don't care what the system says." Henderson snapped, turning on her. "I am the captain of this aircraft. My authority is final, and I'm not comfortable with this passenger boarding. I suspect her ticket is fraudulent, and her attitude is hostile. She's a potential security risk." It was a breathtaking escalation from a routine check to a security threat. Chloe, the flight attendant, gasped. Annalise felt the blood drain from her face. She was a healer, a woman who had dedicated her life to mending broken hearts, and this man was branding her a danger in front of a dozen strangers. "That is a baseless and defamatory accusation," Annalise stated, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "You have no grounds for this. My grounds are my 30 years of experience flying for this airline doctor." He sneered, handing her IDs back. "And my experience tells me something's wrong here. I'm denying you boarding. You can take it up with customer service." He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. "Chloe, get these other passengers settled. We're already behind schedule because of this." He strode into the cockpit without a backward glance. The other passengers, avoiding her eyes, shuffled past her as if she were contagious. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Chloe offered her a look of profound apology and helplessness before disappearing into the plane. Annalise stood alone on the jet bridge, the sounds of the cabin door closing echoing the finality of the act. She turned and walked back to the gate, her composure a fragile shell around a core of incandescent rage and hurt. Sarah, the gate agent, was wringing her hands. "Dr. Dubois, I am so sorry. I don't know what to say. I've never seen him do that." Annalise simply nodded, unable to speak. She walked away from the gate, away from the prying eyes, and found a quiet corner by a large window overlooking the tarmac. She watched as Flight 212, her flight, pushed back from the gate. Then she took a deep breath to steady her hands and pulled out her phone. She didn't call the airline's platinum customer service line. She didn't search for a complaint form. She scrolled to a single contact, Marcus, and pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, my love. Boarding." "Okay." Her voice broke as she tried to answer. "Marcus." The shift in his tone was immediate. The easygoing affection vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused concern. "Annalise, what is it? What's wrong?" Leaning against the cold glass, she recounted the entire incident, her voice low and trembling with suppressed emotion. She told him about the captain's words, "You people, security risk," and the crushing public shame of it all. On the other end of the line, Marcus Thorne was silent. He was a man known for his decisive action and sharp intellect, but at that moment he just listened. He let her pour out the entire ugly story. When she finished, her breath catching in a sob, the silence stretched for a beat longer. When he finally spoke, his voice was terrifyingly calm. It was a voice she knew well, the voice he used when a multi-billion-dollar deal was on the line, the voice that unnerved corporate titans. "What was the pilot's name?" he asked. "Henderson," she whispered. "Captain Robert Henderson. And the airline is Aira Vista." "Yes, okay." He said the single word, carrying an immense weight. "Listen to me, Annalise. I want you to go to the United Lounge, get a ticket on the next flight to San Francisco first class. I don't care what it costs. Just get on the first available plane. I'll have a car waiting for you at SFO. Are you okay to do that?" "Yes," she said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Marcus, what are you going to do?" There was another pause. "I'm going to handle it, darling." He said, his voice a low promise of retribution. "They humiliated my wife. They have no idea what they've just done. Just get home safely." "I love you." "I love you too," she whispered. As she ended the call, Annalise looked out the window and saw Flight 212 taking its place in the queue for takeoff. Inside that metal tube was a man who believed he had won a man secure in his petty tyranny. He had no idea that thousands of feet below, a force more powerful than he could possibly comprehend had just been set in motion, aimed directly at him and the airline he represented. While Annalise found a quiet refuge in the serene impersonal luxury of the United Polaris Lounge, Marcus Thorne stood in his office on the 80th floor of the Thorne Capitol building in downtown San Francisco. The panoramic windows displayed a city of fog, an ambition, a view he usually found inspiring. Today, he saw nothing. His mind was 3,000 meters away in a jet bridge at JFK. He had ended the call with his wife, his hand gripping his phone so tightly he was surprised the screen didn't crack. The quiet fury that had settled in his chest was a cold, dense star of rage. Marcus Thorne had built a private equity empire by being ruthless, strategic, and above all, unemotional and in business. But this wasn't business. This was Annalise. His Annalise, the brilliant, compassionate woman who spent her days literally holding human hearts in her hands. The woman who could calm his most turbulent moods with a single touch. The idea of her standing alone, being systematically stripped of her dignity by an unformed bigot, was more than he could bear. A simple lawsuit was beneath the scope of the insult. A public apology would be a hollow corporate scripted piece of trash. Firing the pilot was necessary but insufficient. It would treat the problem as a single bad apple, not as a diseased tree. Captain Henderson didn't act in a vacuum. He acted with the confidence of a man who knew the system would protect him. Marcus wanted the system. He wanted the tree, the entire orchard. He buzzed his intercom. "Evelyn, clear my afternoon. Get in here now." Less than a minute later, Evelyn Reed walked in. She was his chief operating officer and lead counsel, a woman with a mind like a steel trap and a loyalty to Marcus that was absolute. She had been with him since he was just a brash upstart with a bold idea. She was one of the few people who could keep up with him and the only one he trusted implicitly with the architecture of his empire. "Close the door," he said without preamble. She did, her sharp eyes taking in his rigid posture, the white-knuckled grip on his phone. She'd seen him angry, but this was different. This was cold. "What's happened?" she asked, foregoing any pleasantries. Annalise was denied boarding on her flight home from New York Aira Vista Airlines. The captain, a man named Robert Henderson, publicly accused her of fraud and called her a security risk. Evelyn's expression tightened. She had immense respect for Dr. Dubois. On what grounds? On the grounds that she was a black woman sitting in a seat he felt she didn't belong in. Marcus said, his voice laced with venom. Evelyn was silent for a moment, processing the implications. "We'll destroy them," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'll get the litigation team started. We'll file for defamation, emotional distress, civil rights violations. We'll make this the most expensive act of discrimination in aviation history." Marcus held up a hand. "No, that's a skirmish. I want a war. I want the whole airline." Evelyn blinked. For the first time in their long professional relationship, she was genuinely speechless. The whole Marcus Aira Vista is a publicly traded company. It's a legacy carrier. Its market cap is over $4 billion, I know, he said calmly. "What's their stock symbol?" She stared at him, realizing he was deadly serious. A slow smile spread across her face. This was the Marcus Thorne. She knew the man who didn't just win the game, but changed the rules and bought the stadium. AVJ, she said, already pulling her tablet from her briefcase. Aravista Jet Lines. Good, Marcus said, walking over to the large digital whiteboard that covered one wall of his office. Let's get to work. I want to know everything. Their financials for the last 5 years, debt load, major institutional shareholders, pension fund, holdings, executive board composition vulnerabilities. For the next 4 hours, the office transformed into a command center. Evelyn's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up SEC filings, analyst reports from Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, and market intelligence from their proprietary systems. Data streams filled the whiteboard. They're weaker than they look, Evelyn noted, circling a set of figures in red. They're carrying significant long-term debt from their last fleet upgrade. Fuel costs have been eating into their margins. They missed their last 2 quarterly earnings estimates. The stock is depressed. It's trading at $16 a share, down from a high of $28 last year. Who holds them? Marcus asked, pacing like a caged panther. The usual suspects, Evelyn replied. Vanguard, BlackRock, a few major state pension funds. About 60% is institutional. The CEO is a man named Richard Sterling Oldgard, been there forever, more of a glad-hander than an operator. Perfect, Marcus breathed. He won't see this coming. He'll think it's a market fluctuation. Marcus's plan was audacious. A corporate raider's dream. It would be a hostile takeover executed with lightning speed and overwhelming force. Thor Capital would start by quietly acquiring a significant stake in Aravista on the open market just under the 5% threshold that required public disclosure. Then they would launch a tender offer directly to the shareholders, offering a premium price, say $22 a share, to buy their stock. It would be an offer too good for many to refuse, especially given the airline's recent poor performance. This will cost billions. Evelyn stated not as a deterrent, but as a logistical point. We have the liquidity, Marcus said dismissively. Leverage the transportation and infrastructure fund. This fits the portfolio. We'll frame it as an acquisition to unlock shareholder value by overhauling an inefficient and culturally backward management. The press release will be a work of art, Evelyn murmured, already drafting it in her head. They wouldn't mention the incident with Annalise. Not yet. That was their ace in the hole. The public justification would be pure cold business. The real reason would remain private. The engine driving the entire machine. I want to be on the phone with the heads of the California and New York state pension funds by morning, Marcus commanded. They hold a combined hand of the stock. I have relationships there. I'll make the case personally. I want this done, Evelyn. And I want it done fast. I want CEO Richard Sterling's head on a platter before he even understands why he's kneeling. As Evelyn worked marshaling teams of analysts and lawyers, Marcus stepped away and looked at his phone. A text from Annalise had come in an hour earlier. Landed safely. Your driver James was here heading home. I love you. He typed back a reply. I love you more. Rest. I'm taking care of everything. He looked back at the whiteboard, a complex web of numbers and names that represented an entire corporation. To the world, this was a hostile takeover, a ruthless play for power and profit. But for Marcus Thorne, every number, every strategy, every phone call was a love letter to his wife. He wasn't just buying an airline. He was righting a wrong in the only way he knew how, by seizing the very power that had been used to hurt her and wielding it as a tool of absolute unsparing justice. The storm was coming for Aravista, and Captain Robert Henderson would be at its very center. The first tremor hit Aravista's corporate headquarters in Dallas on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't a seismic shock, just a faint, unusual vibration on the stock market ticker. Richard Sterling, the airline CEO for the past 12 years, noticed the unusual trading volume in AVJ stock during his morning briefing. Looks like we're popular today. He chuckled to his CFO, a perpetually worried man named George. Someone knows something we don't. Volume is up 400% over the daily average, George said, peering at his screen. And the price is ticking up. Someone's buying and they're not being subtle. Sterling waved a dismissive hand. Probably a hedge fund making a momentum play. It'll settle down now. About those new baggage fees for the fourth quarter. Sterling was a creature of comfort. He loved the perks of being a CEO. The golf outings with politicians, the fawning articles and trade magazines, the sense of presiding over a grand historic American brand. He was less fond of the messy details of operations finance and most of all cultural issues. He viewed his company as a large, complex machine that for the most part ran itself. By Wednesday, the vibration had become a sustained earthquake. The stock had jumped 15%. Wall Street was buzzing. Financial news channels like CNBC and Bloomberg were dedicating segments to the mysterious buyer of Aero Vista stock. Sterling's phone began to ring. Board members were getting nervous. "It's just market volatility," John Sterling assured his lead independent director. "We're holding the course. Strong headwinds, but clear skies ahead." He was a man who spoke in aviation metaphors, even when his company was in a nosedive. The bomb dropped on Thursday at 9:01 a.m. EST, 1 minute after the market opened. A press release issued by the formidable Thorn Capital hit the wire. Thorn Capital announces tender offer to acquire Aero Vista Jet Lines for $22 per share. In the Aero Vista boardroom, the news landed like a sonic boom. George, the CFO, looked like he was going to be physically ill. Richard Sterling stared at the release on his monitor, his face turning a blotchy red. Thorn Capital, Marcus Thorn. He knew the name, of course. Thorn was a legend, a corporate predator of the highest order, a man who didn't make idle plays. When Thorn moved on a company, it was for the kill. "Get Evelyn Reed on the phone," Sterling barked at his assistant. The call was brief and brutal. Evelyn was polite, professional, and utterly immovable. "Richard, it's a generous offer," she said, her voice like polished steel. "It represents a 37% premium on Monday's closing price. We believe it delivers significant and immediate value to your shareholders who have been patient long enough." "This is a hostile, opportunistic attack," Sterling sputtered. "We're a great American company. We won't be bullied. This isn't about bullying Richard. It's about performance." Evelyn replied coolly, "Your board has a fiduciary duty to consider the offer. We look forward to their response." And she hung up. Panic set in. Sterling and his board initiated the standard defense maneuvers. They adopted a poison pill strategy, a shareholder rights plan designed to make the takeover prohibitively expensive. They started searching for a white knight, another friendly company to acquire them and save them from Thorn, but Marcus had anticipated all of it. He began his own offensive. He personally called the managers of the major pension funds. His pitch was masterful. He didn't speak of grand visions. He spoke of numbers and accountability. "Your fund members, the teachers and firefighters, have seen their investment in Aero Vista underperform for 3 years," he'd say, his voice resonating with sincerity. "Sterling's management is asleep at the wheel. We can unlock value, streamline operations, and deliver the return your members deserve." Then he would add a carefully chosen sentence. "Beyond the financials, there are deep-seated cultural issues at the airline that are creating massive unmitigated liabilities. The brand is at risk from a culture of complacency that starts at the top." And he offered no specifics, letting their imaginations fill in the blanks. It was more effective than any accusation. Meanwhile, somewhere over Nebraska, Captain Robert Henderson was flying Flight 451 to Chicago. He'd heard the news about the takeover attempt. From a co-pilot, he scoffed. "Another Wall Street shark trying to strip mine the company for parts." Henderson said with a grimace, "They do this every few years. The union will fight them. Sterling will fight them. Nothing ever comes of it." The incident with the black woman at JFK a week ago was a distant memory, a minor annoyance he'd already forgotten. He had asserted his authority, and that was that. No one had questioned him. No report had been filed. In his mind, he was an untouchable veteran, the backbone of the airline. He couldn't imagine a world in which a boardroom battle in New York could have anything to do with a brief confrontation on a jet bridge. He was wrong. The story leaked by an anonymous source within Thor Capital had already started to circulate among key financial journalists. It wasn't public yet, but the right people were hearing it. The narrative was being shaped. Aero Vista wasn't just financially weak, it was morally bankrupt, with a rot that manifested in incidents just like the one involving Dr. Annalise Dubois. The takeover was being framed not just as a financial move, but as a necessary moral cleansing. Sterling's search for a white knight failed. No other airline or corporation wanted to get into a bidding war with the notoriously relentless and deep-pocketed Marcus Thorn, especially with the whispers of a major scandal brewing. The tide turned when the California Public Employees Retirement System, CalPERS, one of the largest pension funds in the world, publicly announced it would be tendering its shares to Thorn Capital. They cited a need for new leadership and a change in corporate culture at Ara Vista. The next day, 2 more major funds followed suit. It was a domino effect. The poison pill was irrelevant if a majority of shareholders wanted to sell. The board's resistance crumbled. Less than 3 weeks after Annalise's humiliating ordeal, Richard Sterling sat in his vast office, a letter of surrender drafted by his lawyers on the desk in front of him. The board had voted to accept Thorn Capital's offer. The company was being sold. Sterling still didn't understand the why. He assumed it was pure corporate raiding. He had no idea that the entire multi-billion-dollar transaction, the earthquake that had shattered his career, had been triggered by a single act of prejudice from one of his pilots. He was a casualty in a war he never even knew he was fighting. The final brutal reckoning was yet to come. The day the acquisition was finalized, a pia of nervous energy hung over Ara Vista's Dallas headquarters. Employees whispered in corridors and around coffee machines. They knew the new owner, Marcus Thorn, was a ruthless operator. Layoffs were expected. Heads were expected to roll. No one felt safe. At 1,000 a.m., sharp, the doors to the main lobby swished open. Marcus Thorn entered. He was not alone. At his side, exuding a quiet and formidable grace, was Dr. Annalise Dubois. They were not smiling. Their presence was not celebratory. It was judicial. They were followed by Evelyn Reed and a small team from Thorn Capital. The first order of business was an all-hands meeting in the auditorium. Richard Sterling, hoping to salvage some role or at least a graceful exit with his full golden parachute, met them at the elevator. "Mr. Thorn, welcome to Ara Vista," he said, extending a hand with a practiced, oily smile. "I'm Richard Sterling. I want you to know I am fully prepared to assist in a smooth transition." And Marcus walked past him without breaking stride, his eyes fixed forward. He didn't shake the offered hand. Annalise met Sterling's gaze for a fleeting second, her expression unreadable but deeply unsettling to the now former CEO. The public snub was a brutal, deliberate message. In the packed auditorium, Marcus took the stage. He looked out over the sea of anxious faces. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm and carrying to the back of the room. "I am Marcus Thorn, as of 900 a.m. This morning, Thorn Capital is the sole owner of this airline, and that means the culture of complacency, of excuses, and of looking the other way ends today." He paused, letting the words sink in. "There will be changes. We will be restructuring from the top down to build a company that is not only profitable, but also one that is worthy of the public's trust. A company where every single passenger and every single employee is treated with dignity and respect without exception." He then looked towards the wings where Richard Sterling was standing, looking pale and sick. "That change begins with leadership, Richard Sterling." Sterling flinched as his name was called. "Your tenure as CEO has allowed a culture of prejudice and unaccountability to fester," Marcus said, his voice like ice. "You have failed this company, you have failed your employees, and you have failed your customers. Your service is no longer required. Security will escort you from the building. Your severance will be debated by our lawyers." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Firing the CEO publicly on day one was a move of breathtaking audacity. It was a clear signal the old ways were dead and buried, as Sterling was led away looking utterly broken. Marcus continued, "Now to the reason we are all really here." He turned and gestured to a chair at the side of the stage. "I believe some of you are familiar with Dr. Annalise Dubois, a distinguished surgeon and a recent passenger on one of your flights." Annalise stood and walked to the podium. A screen behind her lit up, not with a corporate logo, but with a high-resolution security still from JFK's Gate B-24. It showed a pilot in uniform, his face twisted in a sneer, standing over a woman holding her ID. 3 weeks ago, Annalise began, her voice steady and clear, devoid of the tremor it held that day on the jet bridge. "I was denied boarding on Flight 212. I was told by the captain of that flight that my first-class ticket seemed fraudulent. I was told that you people are quick to make accusations, and finally I was labeled a security risk and publicly shamed. A heavy silence fell over the auditorium. You could have heard a pin drop. This was not about a faulty ticket or security protocol. Annalise continued, this was about a man with authority who decided, based on the color of my skin, that I did not belong. The most terrifying part was not his prejudice, but his confidence. The confidence of a man who believed he was utterly untouchable. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the room. That man's name is Captain Robert Henderson, and my husband and I have bought this airline to ensure that no one at this company ever feels that untouchable again. The revelation hit the room like a physical force. The whispers, the rumors, it was all true. The entire multi-billion-dollar takeover was because of one pilot. At that very moment, 300 miles away in Chicago, Captain Robert Henderson's layover was interrupted by a sharp knock on his hotel room door. It was the hotel manager accompanied by two stern-faced men in dark suits. Captain Henderson, the manager said nervously, you're to come with us. A car is waiting. You have been summoned to a meeting at corporate headquarters in Dallas. Immediately. Henderson was irritated, but not yet alarmed. A meeting. I'm scheduled to fly the return leg to SFO in 6 hours. This is highly irregular. The flight has been assigned a new captain, one of the suits said flatly. The car is waiting. The private jet ride to Dallas was quiet and tense. Henderson still believed this was some overblown administrative follow-up, a slap on the wrist, perhaps a mandatory sensitivity training session. He rehearsed his defense in his head. He was protecting the aircraft. The passenger was hostile. He used his captain's discretion. He felt secure. He was escorted directly from the airport to the headquarters and led not to a small HR office, but to the main executive boardroom. The room was vast and intimidating, with a polished mahogany table that seemed a mile long. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thorne. By his side sat Dr. Annalise Dubois. Standing behind them was Evelyn Reed, holding a thick folder. Henderson stopped dead in the doorway. He recognized her instantly, the woman from the jet bridge. A wave of ice water washed through his veins. His carefully constructed arrogance began to crumble, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. He finally understood. Captain Henderson. Marcus said, his voice dangerously soft. Please have a seat. Henderson's legs felt like lead as he walked to the chair at the far end of the table. He felt small, insignificant. You probably don't recognize me, Marcus said. I'm Marcus Thorne. I own this table, this chair, and the wings on your uniform, but you do recognize my wife, Dr. Dubois. Annalise looked at Henderson, her expression not of anger, but of profound disappointment. Captain, I never asked for an apology. I never asked for you to be fired. All I asked for was to be treated like a human being. Henderson opened his mouth to speak, to offer some desperate, belated excuse. Marcus cut him off. Save it, he snapped. Evelyn. Reed stepped forward and opened the folder. Robert Henderson, pursuant to the terms of your employment contract, which Thorne Capital now controls, we are exercising Clause 34B, termination for gross misconduct that brings the company into disrepute. Henderson's face went white. My union. Your union has already been notified, Evelyn said coolly. We provided them with the security footage audio recordings from the gate and sworn affidavit from 3 witnesses, including flight attendant Chloe Benson and gate agent Sarah Jenkins. Your union representative sends his apologies. He will not be representing you in this matter. Chloe, the kind-faced flight attendant, he had dismissed her and she had become a nail in his coffin. Your employment with Aerovista, now a Thorne Capital company, is terminated, effective immediately, Marcus stated. Furthermore, Evelyn continued, we have filed a formal complaint with the FAA recommending a full review of your pilot's license based on your reckless and discriminatory abuse of captain's authority. And as per the gross misconduct clause, your company pension and retirement benefits are hereby forfeited. This was the final blow. 30 years of service. His retirement, his future gone. Henderson slumped in his chair. A broken man. The smug, authoritative pilot from the jet bridge had evaporated, leaving a hollow shell. You took away my wife's dignity for a few moments of petty power, Marcus said, standing up and walking around the table. until he was looming over Henderson. So I took away your career, I took away your pension, I took away your pride. It seems a fair trade. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper. Security will now escort you from the premises. You are banned for life from all Aero Vista property and from flying on any of our aircraft. Not in the cockpit, not in coach. And certainly, he added, with a final devastating twist of the knife, not in first class. Get him out of my sight. As two security guards gently but firmly lifted the stunned Henderson to his feet and led him away, Annalise watched him go. There was no triumph in her expression, only a deep, weary sadness. The poison had been excised. Now the real work of healing the company she and her husband now owned could begin. The story of Captain Robert Henderson's spectacular career emulation was not merely reported. It was dissected. The exclusive in the New York Times, meticulously curated by Evelyn Reed's team, landed with the force of a cultural thunderclap. It wasn't just a business story about a corporate takeover. It was a human drama of prejudice and retribution perfectly packaged for a nation grappling with these very issues. The article laid the facts bare. The security footage stills the damning quotes from the now celebrated flight attendant Chloe Benson, the quiet dignity of Dr. Annalise Dubois, and the cold corporate fury of Marcus Thorne. For Robert Henderson, the world ended not with a bang, but with the glow of his phone. In a drab airport motel room near DFW, he had been unceremoniously dumped there after his dismissal left to book his own commercial flight home in coach. The irony was a bitter acid in his throat. He saw his own face staring back at him from the news alert, his expression on the jet bridge twisted into a permanent sneer of condescending authority. He read the article, his hands trembling. The words racially charged abuse of power and culture of immanentity burned like embers on the screen. His carefully constructed self-image as a heroic guardian of the skies dissolved into the portrait of a common bigot. His phone began to ring. The first call was from a colleague sputtering, "Bob, what the hell did you do?" The next was from his brother, his voice a mixture of shock and shame. Then came the reporter's a relentless barrage of calls and texts from numbers he didn't recognize. He hurled the phone against the wall where it clattered to the floor, its screen shattering. But the silence that followed was even more terrifying. His first desperate call was to his union representative, a man with whom he'd shared beers and complaints for 2 decades. The response was not the full-throated defense he expected, but a cold, pragmatic calculus of survival. "Bob, I've seen the file Thorne's people sent over." The rep, a man named Mike, said, his voice heavy with resignation. The video, the audio from the gate mics, multiple sworn statements. "Bob, there's nothing to defend here. They have you dead to rights. We can't spend the union's capital on a case that is not only unwinnable, but makes the entire pilot cause look bad. I'm sorry. Our hands are tied." Abandoned Henderson scrambled to find legal counsel. The first lawyer, a high-priced litigator specializing in wrongful termination, listened to his story, looked up the now viral news articles, and barely suppressed a laugh. "Captain, you're not a victim here. You're the villain in a national news story. No jury in the country would side with you. My advice, vanish." The few lawyers who would even consider his case demanded massive retainers he no longer had access to, with his assets frozen pending the outcome of the pension forfeit. The FA investigation was the final nail in his professional coffin, and it was a humiliating process of bureaucratic dissection. He sat before a panel of stern-faced administrators who reviewed his entire 30-year career through the new lens of the JFK incident. They questioned his judgment, his temperament, his fitness to command. The indefinite suspension of his license was a life sentence. A pilot in his late 50s with a disciplinary suspension was unemployable. His career wasn't just over, it was being retroactively erased. The rot spread from his professional life to his personal one. He became a pariah in his own manicured suburban neighborhood. The friendly waves from neighbors were replaced with averted eyes and curtains drawn hastily. His golf partners suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The social world he had built, predicated on his status as a senior airline captain, evaporated. The final schism happened in his own living room. His wife Brenda, a woman who had stood by him for 30 years, finally broke. "This isn't about one mistake, Bob." She screamed, tears streaming down her face. A foreclosure notice crumpled in her fist. It's about your pride, your arrogance. You looked at that woman and you couldn't stand that she was your equal. You had to put her in her place. Now look where it's put us. You've lost everything because you couldn't stand to be wrong. She left a week later. The house followed a few months after that. The hard karma was not a single event, but a slow, grinding erosion of a life. Robert Henderson, the man who once commanded 100-ton machines that defied gravity, now found himself driving a beat-up 10-year-old sedan to a job interview for a dispatcher at a regional trucking company in Flagstaff, Arizona. He got the job. His new life was a symphony of fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee and cheap disinfectant, and the disembodied voices of truckers crackling over the radio. He sat in a cramped cubicle, a headset, his new uniform, his authority reduced to directing shipments of discount furniture and produce across state lines. He was a broken man haunted by a single moment of prejudice, a ghost adrift in a sea of his own making. While Henderson's world shrank to the size of a cubicle, Era Vista was being reborn. Marcus Thorne didn't just clean house, he demolished the old structure and rebuilt it on a new foundation of ethical accountability. The transformation was driven by Annalise. As chair of the new Board of Ethics and Inclusion, she wielded real power. In one of her first meetings, a senior executive from the old guard proposed a new revenue enhancement strategy that involved drastically reducing the seat pitch and coach to fit more passengers. Annalise listened patiently, then calmly addressed the room. "The numbers on your spreadsheet are compelling," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But they omit a crucial variable: human dignity. Our new slogan is your journey, your dignity. This policy is a direct contradiction of that promise. We will not treat our passengers like cattle to improve margins by 0.25%. The proposal is vetoed." The executive was stunned into silence. The message was clear. Profit would no longer be the only god at Aero Vista. Chloe Benson became the heart of the airline's cultural change. Promoted to a senior director role in in-flight training and development, she spearheaded a new program called the Conscious Crew. She would stand before new recruits, her presence warm but authoritative. For decades, the priority in the air was just safety, she'd explained, pacing before the trainees. Now it's safety and humanity. We're going to use a real-life case study. A senior captain, a decorated doctor, a first-class ticket, and it all went wrong. Why? She would walk them through the JFK incident, deconstructing every decision, every missed opportunity for intervention. "Look at your colleagues," she would urge. "Read the room. Do you see tension? Is someone being singled out? You are not a bystander. You are part of a crew. Your job is to de-escalate support and protect everyone, passengers and fellow crew members. Your silence can be as damaging as an act of aggression." The public, initially skeptical, began to take notice. The changes weren't just cosmetic. On-time performance improved as employee morale soared. Customer complaints plummeted. Social media, once a hotbed of Aero Vista complaints, began to fill with stories of exceptional service. The airline won the J.D. Power Award for customer satisfaction for the first time in its history, and 2 years after the takeover was named to Forbes' list of America's best employers, the stock price, which Marcus had acquired at a premium of 20 to was now trading north of $45, he had proven on a colossal scale that decency was profitable. 2 years after the takeover, on a mild autumn evening, Marcus and Annalise stood on the balcony of their home. The fog was rolling back from the bay, and the lights of the city twinkled below. "I was reading an article today." Annalise said, her voice soft as she leaned her head against his shoulder. "It was about corporate activism. They used you as the prime example. It made me think, did we become the very thing we were fighting, a massive, overwhelming force that crushed a single person's life?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching a plane begin its graceful ascent into the deepening twilight. "I've thought about that a lot," he finally said, turning to look at her. "Power is a tool, Annalise. It's inert. It's the intent behind it that gives it moral direction. Henderson used his power, the authority of his uniform, and his position to inflict pain and humiliation for the sake of his own ego. We used our power to perform radical surgery on a diseased corporation. It wasn't gentle. It was invasive and painful for some, but it was necessary to save the patient and to create something healthy and strong in its place. He gestured with his chin toward the sky. The plane banking over the bay caught the last rays of the sun. On its tail, they could just make out the new Aero Vista logo. "We didn't destroy a man." Marcus said, his voice a low, certain whisper. "We destroyed a mindset. We destroyed the idea that you can dehumanize someone without consequence. What we built in its place, that is our legacy." Annalise watched the plane until it was just a blinking light against the tapestry of stars. There was no triumph in her heart, but a deep, resonant peace. The scar from that day on the jet bridge would always be a part of her, but it no longer acted. It was a reminder that from a moment of profound ugliness, they had forced something beautiful and enduring to grow. That single ugly moment of prejudice at gate B24 could have ended in a complaint form lost in a corporate file cabinet. Instead, it triggered a revolution. It showed that accountability doesn't always come from a committee. Sometimes it comes from unwavering love and the power to enforce change. The story of Annalise Dubois and Marcus Thorne is a powerful reminder that while injustice and bigotry still exist, karma can be a swift and decisive force, especially when it has the backing of a multi-billion-dollar fortune. It reminds us that the best response to being told you don't belong is to buy the building and rewrite the rules for everyone. If this story of ultimate justice and consequence resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who believes in the power of standing up to prejudice. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more true life stories where karma is the final satisfying destination. What are your thoughts on Marcus's actions? Was it justice or revenge? Let us know in the comments below.